Everyone gets a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Brian Smith is a wise man, but his wisdom is hard-earned. The death of his daughter sent him on a quest to find meaning in life, and part of his quest has been an exploration into spirituality and near-death experiences and the lessons we can learn from these stories. Join us as we talk about life, death, purpose, trust, forgiveness, and so much more. Brian, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Well, I'll start with when my daughter passed away 7.5 years ago now. It was June 24th, 2015. She was 15 years old. Her name was Shayna Lane Smith. She went to bed the night of June 23rd. It was a normal night. She went to bed that night, and the next morning we went to wake her up, and she was non-responsive. So that was the beginning of this phase of my life. That was my big bump in the road. Before that, I'd had a fear of death. I would call it even a phobia. Thanatophobia is the technical term for it. Where from the time I was about the time Shayna's age was, one of my early teens, I started having panic attacks, and I was scared to death that I was going to die. And I just knew I was going to die suddenly, and I knew that I was going to die young. That didn't come to pass, but because of that, I started studying the afterlife early in my life. Probably when I was in my 20s, I started studying everything I could find about the afterlife, about mediumship, near-death experiences, afterlife communications, religious things, philosophical things, scientific, because my background's in engineering. I wanted to know exactly how things work. So by the time Shayna had passed away, it probably been about 20 years that I had been studying the afterlife. So the good news for me is when she did pass, I always knew that Shayna was okay, and that was never really an issue for me. But there was still that longing, that missing her, that lack of her physical presence, all the dreams and aspirations we had for her life going forward, for our lives going forward, all that just being suddenly taken away. And suddenly, you go to bed one night, you're living in one world, you wake up the next morning and you're living in a completely different world. And that was the beginning. That was the big bump in the road for me.
That's such a good explanation of how your life changes and just turns on a dime.
It does. We say that we know that things could change at any moment, and we want to live like that's true. But the reality is you really can't. We have to, live assuming that we're going to continue. We've got to make plans for the future. We think our children are going to grow up. We think we're going to outlive our children. All those assumptions are just part of the human condition. But the fact is that literally everything can change in a moment. And for many people, it does. So this was, as I said, this was my situation. But since that time, I work with an organization called Helping Parents Heal. And I've worked with thousands of parents who have lost children. So it can happen to anybody at any time. And there's no rhyme or reason to it.
What are some of the common things we all go through in the grief process?
Well, some of the common things we go through is just feeling like the world's been pulled out from under us. Like everything has changed. Like nothing is the same. I remember my wife and I it was about a month after Shayna passed. We were out. I take my wife out to lunch, and we were driving back from lunch, and we both had the same thought at the same time. We're looking at, and we see people walking, back and forth in and out of the movie theater, people walking out of restaurants. And we said, don't these people realize that the world has changed, that the world, is different. So when this happens, and I've talked to people literally, one person that their vision went black and white. They lost their ability to see color for a while. And that's a good metaphor for the way we are walking through the world. The world just seems devoid of any color, of any hope, of any joy. So that's a very common early experience of grief. There's a lot of times guilt associated with grief, whether it's our fault or not. And at 99.9% of the time, it's not our fault. But especially for parents, they assume that they should have kept their child safe. There can be fear of another loss coming up, but there can also be unexpected things, like there can be numbness where you just don't feel anything. There's such an overwhelm of emotions that your brain just shuts down and you don't feel anything. Um, Sometimes there's actually relief if someone suffered from a long-term illness, for example, and they pass away. The person that's left might feel relief, and then they feel guilt about feeling the relief. So it's a very, very complex thing. There's no really normal pattern. There's really no normal emotions. It comes and goes. It comes in waves where it's like you'll be okay one minute, and the next minute a wave will hit you. So it's a pretty rocky road.
Your description about how the world goes on really hits home. When my father died, I felt exactly that. How could everybody go on? Didn't they realize what had happened? And they don't. And my recollection of the year after my father's death is one of black and white. Now, I know I saw color, but it's a very gray sense of memory from an entire year.
Yeah, absolutely true. And this is backed up by science. Our brain chemistry gets thrown off when it's someone that's close to us. It's like we're literally addicted to that person. That we have a chemical reaction to that person, and when that person is taken out of our lives, it really throws off our thinking. So it's been described as grief fog that people go through, where you can't remember things, where you can't process things correctly, and that this first year can seem like a blur to people as they look back on their life. They're like, "Wow, it seems like that year didn't even exist."
That's interesting that it goes to brain chemistry. I never knew that. Speaking of brain chemistry, I'm reading an interesting book right now called After. You're probably familiar with it.
Yes.
Wonderful book about near death experiences. And that's another realm that you've been very active in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, near-death experiences are fascinating to me for a number of reasons. The first is they prove the existence of our consciousness surviving bodily death. So that's huge. That's a big one, right? When we know that people have actually, quote, died or are really died, their bodies have shut down, their brains aren't functioning, their hearts aren't functioning, and they have coherent memories. They can tell us things that were happening in the room. They can tell us things that were happening in another room, things that were happening across the country or in around the world. So that's a fascinating thing about near-death experience. But the other thing is they literally change people. When people come back, they're not the same person they were before they had the experience. And they tell us that they've been taught these relatively universal lessons. We can study the near-death experience and find out what the lessons are that people that have them learn about the interconnectedness of everybody, about the fact that it's all based on love, that it's all consciousness, that everything will be okay in the end. These are some of the lessons from the near-death experience. So Dr. Ken Ring, who studied them a lot, he calls studying the near-death experience the benign virus. We can actually learn a lot of the lessons that the people that had the experience learned without having to go through the experience itself. So I've interviewed probably 50 people or more who've had near-death experiences, and I never get tired of hearing about them.
I don't either. Mary Neal was on this show, and she said that as a result of her NDE, her perspective on the world went from hope to trust. That's a
Yeah,
huge paradigm shift.
absolutely. Absolutely. And again, people that have had near-death experience can say that because they've seen with their own eyes, but people who have studied them, for extensive amount of time can pretty much get to the same level of trust. I mean, I think I'm pretty much there myself because the evidence is just so overwhelming. And it makes an entire difference as to how you view your life, even your daily life, when you realize that this is just a small part of a greater life that's a continuous life, and that our bodies are just a vehicle that we use while we're here.
One of the things you mentioned in one of your talks was that there are some major lessons that come out of an NDE, and one is to live with a purpose. And I think that is so important. And I think that a lot of people are floundering in that regard.
Absolutely. I always say that I think the biggest problems we have in the world is people don't know who they are or why we're here. And, we don't know where we came from. We don't know where we're going. And what's the whole point of this whole thing anyway? I mean, man's a creature. We're always seeking meaning. We're always trying to figure out why. Why is this happening? What am I here for? And the near-death experience really puts that in perspective when people realize that this life, if you look at all the tribulations we go through in life, and you say, well, it's not fair that this person is sick or this person is poor. We only have one life, and we only have a short time over here. When someone passes away when they're 15 years old, we might say, well, that's not fair. There's only one life and they only got to live a little bit of it. But when you take the lesson of the NDE that we are eternal beings, and even more so that typically most NDEs would tell us we live multiple times, it just really changes the whole perspective on everything. And so what if this time around we happen to be poor or we happen to be sick, but another time around we happen to be healthy or we happen to be wealthy, and this time we lived a short life and maybe another time we lived a very long life. So it just takes some of that pressure off in terms of that you have to get it all right while we're here. But on the other hand, we do come here, I believe, with a plan, with a purpose. It's to learn to love each other. It's to learn compassion. It's to learn to hope. It's learn to overcome things. It's to become stronger. All these things. So it really shifts, how we look at our lives, and our purpose doesn't have to be like, earn $1 million or have a great career or anything like that. It could be, raising your children if you're a parent. It could be, just being kind to other people. Those are another lessons we learned from the NDE. It's not the quote big things that are really seen as valuable when we cross back over. It's a lot of times the little things.
I think part of our quest for purpose or meaning is we have to figure out who we are. We have to strip away the societal conditioning that we all have, and start looking within. And our society is set up to be just about totally, externally oriented, and none of the answers are outside of us.
Yeah, that is an excellent point. 100% agree. And it's interesting because in my background, I was raised in a tradition of faith that told us to look outside, to listen to your pastor, to listen to to reach outside for God, to listen to everybody and everything around you, and literally taught that the heart is wicked. Don't turn within. That's the last thing you can trust, is that internal compass that you have. And so I think that's part of our larger society as well. That look outside yourself for answers. And the more I study this, and I've been studying this for decades now, I realize all the answers are within. Even that God that we seek is actually within us, not outside of us. So that's why people are so lost, because they're looking outside for answers, looking outside for meaning. They're looking outside for happiness. They're looking for circumstances to make them happy. If I can just get that job, or if I could just get my dream car, or if I would just had a little bit bigger house, then I'd be happy. And the thing is, we can look around and look at people that have all those things that we want and see how miserable they are. And they're, I believe, actually even more miserable because they've reached all those things and they've realized they don't make them happy. And then the last thing we do when we get really, really desperate is we turn within.
Wow, we have to be desperate to turn within. I think you're right, but that's awful.
It is. I think it's just part of the human condition. I think it's just part of I tell people, I view this life as kind of a game that we play with ourselves. We come here, we deliberately forget who we are. We put on, the veil, as some people call it. So we put on the veil of forgetfulness. We don't remember who we are. We don't remember where we're going. We feel like we've been abandoned. We feel like we're alone. And then we seek what we've forgotten. We seek that connection. We seek that purpose. We seek that getting back to the oneness. And so it's kind of a circular journey that we take while we're here to reestablish what we were before we came. But I believe we go back even stronger. We go back with these experiences that have made us, even stronger and more capable than we were before.
There is no doubt that a serious bump in the road makes you stronger if you survive it. And you just have to survive it. That's all there is to it. I think it's so true that we drive ourselves, we create a binary situation, win lose, where we just drive ourselves to the breaking point sometimes. And that can send us on a quest to look within, which is what we need to be doing. But I think the other thing we need to do is I think we need to start asking ourselves just on a regular daily basis, what am I supposed to learn? Almost every situation that is presented to you is potentially a learning situation.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is a really interesting point because I teach something called positive intelligence, and we talk about the gifts of any circumstance. So it could be a gift of knowledge, the gift of power that makes you stronger, or the gift of inspiration. And I know some people believe that everything that happens to us is a learning experience, and it's here to help us to learn. I happen to believe that, but even if you don't believe that, you can ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What can I do to make this meaningful? How can I use this to inspire me or to make me stronger? Or what did I learn from this experience? So it doesn't have to be necessarily a philosophical belief that everything happens to us happens for a reason, but it's something that we can definitely choose. We can choose whatever the circumstances that we're in to say, hey, I'm going to take this and use it to inspire me, to make me better. I'm going to use this to grow from. That's a choice that we can make at any time.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that asking, what can I learn? There are so many layers to that question. It may be first, what can I learn about somebody else? What can I learn about my behavior? What can I learn about my response? And ultimately, if you're lucky, it will drive you to start asking yourself, what do I need to learn about me?
Yeah. Yeah. It really comes down to what can I learn about me. I think you're right. We can learn about the circumstance. We can learn about the other person. That's all really interesting. But we can't change anybody other than ourselves, and we can only control our own behavior. So the thing is, what can I learn about me? How can I handle the situation better the next time? How can I do things differently so the situation doesn't come up again? Again, how do I take this situation and use it to launch me maybe into something completely different? Maybe something that's, that I wouldn't have done if it weren't for the situation. And going back to the NDE, the near death experience, I believe it's a reset for people. And I believe it may be something that they built in their life plan that says, if I'm not here by this time, then I'm going to have this life changing, life threatening event. And I remember hearing a woman who had a terrible accident that ended up literally breaking her back and saying that, in a sense, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. But then going on to wonder, it's like, well, maybe if I had done, what I was supposed to be doing in the first place, I wouldn't have had to go through this experience. And I think sometimes the universe kind of like first it taps you on the shoulder, then it hits you over the head. And so if we listen early in that process, maybe we can avoid the big lesson.
Yeah, I usually need to get slammed upside the head with a baseball bat, although I'm trying to get a little bit more nuanced in how I receive information, so I don't have to go to that extreme.
But the thing is, that is actually human nature, and there's nothing really wrong with it. As biological creatures, we have evolved to be as efficient as possible. So if we're doing something that's working, whatever that thing happens to be, that takes the least amount of energy. And as long as it's working, we're going to keep doing it. That makes sense from a biological perspective. It's only when something's not working anymore that we do something else. And we do. Oftentimes we resist that. It's like, it's not working. You know that the job that you're in is not the job you're supposed to be in. You know the relationship you're in is not really working out for you. You know that circumstance is not really working, but it's like, yeah, but it's kind of okay and it's comfortable. So we'll stay in it until it gets, uncomfortable enough that it forces us to move. And again, that's just the nature of being a human being.
Oh, I think it is, but I think it's interesting to try to start tuning into this dis-ease that we feel when we know something's not working. We're not ready to change. We don't know what to do or what to change. But if we could pay more attention to that sense of dis-ease, we could move through this so much faster.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And that's where that turning within becomes really, really important to really understand ourselves, to understand our feelings, to understand our emotions, to connect with our higher self, if you want to call it that, or our guides or our angels or whatever it is, that guidance. We can smooth the path out. We can say, hey, this is not satisfying me. This is not what feeds my soul. I'm going to do something different before it gets to a point of extreme. I mean, we can definitely make that choice.
One of the other lessons you bring up is trust the universe. Everything's fine. And that to me it speaks in part to being very present moment and very being present. Because if you think about it, when you're present, everything is fine. This moment is fine. And if you can get your mind out of looking at the past or worrying about the future, really things are okay.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great exercise to do 99.99% of the time. In this moment, we're fine. In this moment, I'm warm. In this moment, I'm well fed. In this moment, I've got shelter. In this moment, I'm physically safe. 99.99% of the time, that's where we are. When we get into trouble is we go into the future and we project a fear into the future. And so that's like, well, what if I don't make enough money? What if I lose my job? What if this happens? But as long as we can stay in the moment, again, 99.99% of the time in this moment, we're okay.
I think that really hit home for me when I went through 6 years of cancer treatment. And I really have become an Eckhart Tolle fan. I love The Power of Now. It's one of my favorite books. But I think that experience forced me keenly into the present because nobody knew what the future held. The outlook wasn't necessarily great. The past was irrelevant at that point, but by pushing me into the present, I was able to see so much beauty that I had ignored before. So much peace and beauty all around me. And that was such a tremendous gift.
And it's interesting that when you say that, and I've heard people that have had cancer and say it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And for someone who hasn't gone through that type of life-changing experience, that might sound weird. It's like, what do you mean being sick was the best thing that happened to you? What do you mean having your life threatened was the best thing that ever happened to you? But as you said, it forces you to contemplate this moment. It forces you into the moment. And in that moment, that's where we find peace. That's where we find wholeness. Even in that moment, even though you might be sick, maybe in that moment you feel okay. And that's the only place life can really be lived. And so that forcing us to come back to that, which is a point of mindfulness, of meditation, is to do that without going through a life-threatening disease or without going through the loss of a loved one. But it's that living in the present that is really where peace is found.
Do you meditate? Do you have a meditation practice?
I do. I've been meditating for probably 10 or 15 years now. I've gone through various types of meditation. Just took a course from a guy named Kelvin Chin, who teaches turning within meditation. So that's what I'm currently doing. But I meditate twice a day.
Yeah, I got into meditation 10 or 15 years ago too. And for me, it's been life changing. The ability to have a still mind is just remarkable because until you know quiet, you don't know loud until you know silent. You don't know hot till you know cold. When your mind becomes still, all of a sudden you realize all the chatter that's been going on and you can recognize it for what it is and choose what you want to think.
Yeah, and I've been trying to get people to meditate for about that long, 10, 15 years now. And so many people tell me I just can't meditate, because they have this idea of what meditation is. And I've learned so much over the years. First of all, there's no one right way to meditate.
Very
Everybody can
true.
meditate because all meditate is being meditation is being aware. It's just being aware you are in the moment. So you can literally sit in the room you're in right now and just be aware and you're meditating. And I just interviewed a guy for my podcast actually just yesterday, and he studied under Osho, and he was telling me about his meditation practice, and he started off doing martial arts. And I said, so what about you in meditation? He goes, I was never a sit still kind of guy. He said, but martial arts forces you to be in the moment. You're practicing moves. Everything's very precise. It's being very much in your body, being very present. And he goes, that's a form of meditation. Going for a walk is a form of meditation. If you go for a walk and just feel the ground under your feet and feel the air coming into your lungs and feel the sun shining on your skin, that can be a meditation. So there's millions of ways to meditate. As many people as there are on the planet Earth, there's that many ways to meditate.
Yeah, and I like walking a labyrinth. I always find that interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. I like walking just in my neighborhood. It's funny because I walk the same path every day. And my wife goes, don't you get bored walking the same way every time? I'm like, no, because that takes away the novelty of the scenery for me. And I can get into a much more meditative state because I'm not looking around to see, what does that house look like? What does that house look like? But I walk for an hour and a half every morning, and that's part of my meditation practice, in addition
Oh,
to sitting twice a day.
that's a wonderful practice. I've been working out at the gym. I need to get moving more outdoors.
Yeah, there's something about being outdoors. The sun, it triggers the vitamin D response, of course, but people, it's great for depression. It's great for this time of year. It's cold where I am. I'm in Ohio, and it's terribly cold, and there's not much light. But at least I get some light because I force myself to get out every day and I walk for an hour and a half.
Okay, it's on my calendar. And I'm in northern Arizona where it is cold. We have snow and everything, but it's in the 40s or 50s, which I'm originally from the East Coast, so the 40s or 50s are almost balmy compared to, the East Coast. One of your other major lessons was forgive fully.
Yeah, yeah. That is a very interesting lesson because most people have the wrong idea about forgiveness. They think of forgiveness as a duty, as a command, as something that's done for the other person, for the person who offended you. And those are all wrong. Forgiveness is about yourself. Forgiveness is about letting go. It's about letting go of that attachment to how you were quote unquote wronged, letting go of that attachment to the person, even if you really dislike this person because they just been terrible to you. It's letting go of that attachment that they have on you that is invisible to them. I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh that said, being angry with someone is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's not beneficial to hold a grudge. So when people, if you want to hold on to something, just realize it's harming you. Now, forgiveness is a process. It's not easy. We, again, naturally speaking, as human beings, if someone hurts us, we want to defend ourselves. We don't want to let that happen again. Forgiveness also doesn't mean we have to let people walk all over us. We can actually move someone out of our life if they're harmful to us. But when people have their near-death experiences, they understand perfectly what the other person feels like, and they understand perfectly how the other person felt when this thing happened. And I believe that if we understand perfectly, then forgiveness not only becomes automatic, it becomes unnecessary because we realize that if we were in the exact same circumstances and we were that exact same person, we would do the exact same thing. So forgiveness is a matter of, again, it's a matter of letting things go for yourself. And when you get to that point, when you can proactively forgive, I interviewed a guy on my podcast who's talking about forgiving people for things before they've even done them. That's the ultimate. When we get to the point where it's like, I don't even forgive anymore because I never take offense. I don't take things personally. When you get to that point, your life just becomes so much easier.
Yeah, I think when you can become an observer, and again, meditation helps with that, you realize that it's not personal. The only thing you control at best is yourself.
Yeah. And most people, when they're doing something to you, they're not even thinking about you. They're not trying to harm you. Now they may be selfish, they may be oblivious, maybe they should be more thoughtful, but people don't typically do things with the intention of hurting us. I think one great example is, when we get cut off in traffic, we get angry, right? That person jumped in front of me. And we'll even go to the point, well, they cut me off on purpose. Well, first of all, why would they do that? They probably didn't cut you off on purpose. But what if you found out later on that person that cut you off in traffic was going to the hospital because their child was dying and they were in a hurry? Then you'd forgive them immediately. You would just let go of that because you understand the circumstance. So that's just a really small example of, when people do things to you, try to not take it personally. Try to understand that, they were in a hurry, or they weren't really thinking about how it's going to impact you. And we all do that. We all do things to other people. We all make mistakes. And, by forgiving them, in a sense, you're forgiving yourself.
Yeah, we never have all the information that somebody else is using to make their decisions. And so when they do things that are hurtful, um, there's a lot of ignorance at play there.
hmm Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I took a course, oh, wow, 35 years ago now, called What You Are is Where You Were When. And in this course, this guy taught you how to look at people and try to understand where they're coming from. Like, when were they raised? Where were they raised? What's their circumstance now? And when you get to that point, you can look at people that way and understand, like, well, maybe that guy is a racist because he was raised in the deep South in the 1950s, or maybe somebody harmed him, or maybe that person doesn't like Japanese people because they were in World War II. Things like that. You can really start to understand where people are coming from, and the forgiveness becomes, again, a lot easier, if not even unnecessary, because most people, as you said, they're acting out of ignorance. They're acting out of not really understanding your situation, your perspective, and they may just be clueless.
I think that's usually the case. And it's amazing to me that we all communicate at all when you consider the fact that we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different experiences. We have different educations. We're at different points in our life. It's astonishing that we manage to connect at all sometimes.
It is, but I think it's really cool learning about each other and each other's, circumstances. And it's funny, I live in a neighborhood where I've known a lot of my neighbors for over 20 years now. And other neighbors, a little bit less, but I can think of one in particular, that neighbor I met about 8 years ago. And we get together very often and we talk. And the more I get together with these people, the more I learn about them, the more I understand where they're coming from. But it takes a decade or more to get to know somebody, to really get to know, like, oh, I didn't know that story about you. I didn't know that about your childhood, or about your parents, or the brother that you lost when you were 12, or a myriad of other things. And so you think about that with somebody that you know on an intimate level, that you feel like you know on an intimate level. How much more so when you meet a stranger? You have no clue of where that person is coming from. You have no idea of their background. You don't even know what happened to them that morning that may be driving them. So this is a matter of, like, we need to give each other a lot of grace because we don't know.
I think that's so true. Well, we do need to give each other a lot of grace. Part of that, well, let me stay with the some of the things that come out of an NDE first. Four major lessons. The last one is love unconditionally. We're all one.
Yeah, yeah, that's when you hear people say everything's about love, it's all about love, God is love. A lot of times we take that as metaphor. When people have near-death experiences, they're like, no, it's not metaphor. God is love. I mean, literally love with a capital L. That's what drives the universe. And we're all connected by love. And we're all one in a very real sense. We are all part of that whole. And so analogies, work because we can't say it directly, but like fingers on a hand, they're all part of the same hand, like cells in a body. We're all part of the same organism, and we perceive separation and we perceive differences but they're just perspective. They're just a perception. And when we do cross back over, we feel that oneness again. We feel that when you meet somebody, you know them like fully. It's like you don't just see their face and know their name. You know their whole background. So we come here and we have this experience of separation. But if we can start to see each other as parts of the same whole and know that everything I do to you, I do to myself, whether for good or for bad, then that's again one of the lessons of the NDE. And one of the things I try to learn from the NDE is a lot of people have them have a life review. And you can start planning your life review now. You can start doing your life review on a daily basis. And if you go through things now and learn the lessons now, then hopefully you want to go through those when you do have your ultimate life review at the end. So it's a great practice to really think about, oh, what's this going to look like in my life review? How do I handle the circumstance? This conflict I'm having, how am I going to feel about this when I'm viewing this, after I'm dead in 50 years?
Well, one of the things I think that drives humans and keeps us apart is judgment.
Mm-hmm.
It's so difficult. I mean, if you just look at the way we're trained in school, we're trained to be analytical, one up, one down. What are the differences? And I think that judgment really gets in the way of forgiveness, trust, just about everything that matters.
Yes, we live in a system that encourages us to compare ourselves to each other, compare other people to other people. We live in a very hierarchical system. We live in systems where some people are better, some people are worse. We're encouraged, from the time we're in school to get better grades. We have grading on a curve. I mean, that's exactly competition, right? I only do well relative to other people. So we do have all these systems that ingrain this judgment in us, and then we're told the ultimate lesson is not to judge each other. It can be difficult, and that's where it makes you have to understand. On one level, we're all the same. We're all unique. We all have our own thing. We're all made differently, like snowflakes. But just like snowflakes are all made out of the same thing. They're all made out of ice crystals. And so in one sense, they're all the same. We're all made of the same stuff. So nobody's inherently any better or any worse than anybody else. Some of us are maybe more ignorant than other people are. Some people are learning different lessons. Some people are different places on their growth experience, but we've all been there. If it's somebody who we feel is less than we are, and for people that we feel are like greater than we are, that's something that we will probably all evolve to at some point. There's always going to be somebody who's further along or not as far along as we are, but we're all on our own journey, and so we really need to try to respect where other people are on their particular journeys, because wherever they are is perfect for them.
Wouldn't it be interesting if rather than judgment, we looked for similarities?
Yes, very much. Yeah, and that's the way I've always tried to live my life. It's like I've always, from the time I was a small child, being a Black man, I'm like, okay, well, that's just the color of my skin. That's not who I am. And the society has tried to drill into me for the last 60 years that that's part of my identity, but it's not. We're all human. And if we could get over that, we would solve a lot of the world's problems. What you said just reminded me of the show Star Trek, and Star Trek has such profound lessons in it. And probably my favorite episode was an episode where these aliens were like half black and half white. There was like right down the middle, they were split, and they were fighting the entire time. These just going head and at it head to head, like to the death. And finally, the crew of the Enterprise said, "Why are you fighting so much? You're the same. You're black on one side and white on the other side." And they said, "Well, no, they're black on the right side and we're black on the left side. They're very different than we are." And it was just an absurd point. I mean, Gene Roddenberry took it to an absurd to make the point that as human beings, we look for these differences. When I was a kid and I was growing up, and I saw in Ireland the Irish or the Catholics and the Protestants fighting each other, from the outside I looked at them, I'm like, well, they're all Christians and they're all white people. But from them, this was deadly and worth the fight over because they were different denominations of the same religion. That's how petty people can be.
Yeah, no, this identity thing is kind of interesting. I mean, it parallels a lot of what we see in our society in that our identity is external. You're black, you're white, you're male, you're female, you're tall, you're short, whatever it is. But what if we defined ourselves instead by more internal things? I'm kind, I'm curious, I have a sense of purpose, intangible things that really do define us.
Right, right, right. And ultimately, we're all human beings. We're all souls. We're all spirits. That's the way I try to look at people. We all have these defining characteristics that we carry around with ourselves, but they're just characteristics. They're not who we are. They're ways that we use to identify each other. If I look at your face, I recognize you, by your face, and we call each other by these names but we're not our names, and we're not our faces, and we're not even our bodies, and we're not even these, that we made this personality might be more kind or whatever at this particular point in time. So these are some of the things that are really interesting to ponder when we start going within. I was interviewing a man yesterday. We were talking about this very thing about like he's written a whole book on like identity, who are you? Who am I? And it's interesting. It's a koan that he has us to ponder. It's like the phrase he uses is who is in. So you sit and you ask yourself, who is in? Who's the person inside? Who is the observer? And a lot of times we start by stripping away, but we're not. It's like, I'm not my name. I'm not my history. I'm not defined because I'm somebody's father or somebody's son or somebody's husband. Those are all characteristics of who I am, but it's not who I am. And we ultimately get to the point where we realize, okay, well, I'm not my emotions. I'm not my thoughts. And we come to that you're really just pure awareness. And that's where we all come in common, and that's where we're all the same.
Really, a lot of this parallels the idea of seeking authenticity, stripping away all these external definitions that society gives us. But that can be a really scary course. And I don't think many people take it because it means facing pain, facing elements of your identity, and losing that is terrifying.
It is. Yeah. It is. It absolutely is. I've gone through a deconstruction process when it comes to my faith. And I remember many, many times as I was studying something, thinking, what's going to happen if I find out this isn't true? Because I identified as this person with this faith. Or you identify as an American, let's say, for example. And some people are so strongly attached to that identity that they can never say that their country's ever done anything wrong because it would hurt their own identity. So that's why it's really important to be able to understand that you're not any of these things. These are characteristics that you have, and maybe even for a while, but that's not who you are at your core. But you're right. It's very scary. I remember, and I was studying about like whether the earth was created in 6 days or whether the earth was created over, millions or billions of years. And I'm reading this book, and the guy convinced me that the earth was old because I was a young earth person at the time. And I remember looking up from the book. I was sitting on my deck. This was 30 plus years ago. I'm sitting on my deck, and I looked up from the book, and it was like the whole world had changed. Like the whole world had just literally changed in that moment when that realization hit me. But because I realized that wasn't who I was able to let go of that and to embrace something new.
Oh, that's such a key point. There's the old Zen story about a wealthy businessman that goes to the Zen master, and he wants to, I don't know if he wants to learn to meditate, I think, or find awareness or whatever, a lofty spiritual goal. And the Zen master starts to pour him some tea, and he pours and pours, and he keeps pouring even as the cup is overflowing onto this gentleman's lap. And he finally gets up and he says, "Why are you, pouring tea onto my lap?" And the Zen master turns and says, "Well, come back to me when you empty your mind. You need an empty mind like an empty cup in order to fill it. And I'm telling the story terribly, forgive me. But the point is that when we release a lot of these preconceived notions that we have, all of a sudden we have space for something new and better.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's necessary to have an identity in the world. It's important. We have to have an ego. Some people don't like the ego, but it's part of living in the body. But there's this thing about doing both at once. Is realizing I'm not the ego. I am not the identity. I am not my body. And again, this mindfulness practice is so important, because then we can rise above that, when necessary. We still have preferences. I know I still would prefer to be well fed than to be hungry. I prefer to have shelter over my head than not have shelter over my head. But I'm not dependent on circumstances so much for my happiness. And I can be content in all things, because I know ultimately that's not who I am. So there's great benefit to it, but it is very, very scary, because our society has not taught us to do that. It's not taught us to turn within and to go deep. And when you start to lose that perspective of you're not all the things you think you are, it feels like you're falling, and there's never going to be anything to catch you, because, well, if I'm not this and I'm not that and I'm not that, then am I anything? And that's actually, some people gotten to the point where they say there is no real I, there is no real self. I haven't gone that far. I think there is a true self, but it's very difficult to put your finger on what it is.
And I think as you go within, you find a power in the unknowing, if that makes sense. And it's transcendental. You take it wherever you go. It's connects you to things. It's actually the less encumbered you are by all these external definitions, the greater power you have to just move through life.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you go far enough and realize that you're not anything, then you realize you're actually everything. And that's the experience of the near-death experience. People say, I suddenly was one with everything. I was connected to everything. I could look at a tree or a flower, and I felt like it was like part of me. Everything was part of me. I was part of it. And the only way to get there is when we stop identifying so closely with the ego, with our constructed identity. So you can get to the point where you go so far, you strip down so much that you actually expand out and become everything.
You started on this path, this kind of a path of spiritual inquiry as a result of a really difficult bump, losing your daughter. If you could rewrite your story, would you?
No, no, I would not. And that's a great question. It's because, again, I work with a lot of parents who have lost children. And, there's no dogma in the organization I'm part of. It's called Helping Parents Heal. But most of us believe that our lives were planned at some level. We believe that, we plan this. And what's really interesting is most of the time when we even bring it up, people will say, yes, I've gotten a lot of benefit out of this, but I would never do it again. Or I would trade it all to have my daughter or my son back. Um, I don't say that anymore. And I really hesitate when I say this, because I would love to have my daughter back. I would if I could freeze time, I would make my one daughter 7, my other daughter 4, and they would never age a day, and we just live in that bliss. But that's not the way life works. I believe that what I've been through will be worth it. And it's made me who I am today. It's the reason why I'm talking to you today. And I know it's only temporary. So no, I wouldn't rewrite my story. But it's interesting because I do have tough times. I have, this world is hard. This world sucks a lot of the time. And I'm very open about that. So one day I was venting about how, I hate my life and I don't want to be here or something. And someone goes, this is terrible that you would say that. You're saying that your life is not worth it. I said, no, I'm not saying that. And I gave them an analogy. I said, when I was younger, I went to school. I got a degree in chemical engineering. The 4 years I was there was horrible. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, was getting my chemical engineering degree. I barely got through it. And I paid people money to do this to me. I paid money to go to this university. But I did it because I thought the degree would be worth it. I said, that's to me kind of like what this life is like, right? Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes the lessons here are like, okay, this is too much. This is not what I signed up for. But I believe that when we get that degree, when we graduate, when we go home, it'll be worth it. And I think that people that go through experiences like I've gone through, maybe we're taking advanced courses. Maybe we're studying at a different level than people who have an easy life. But I wouldn't at this point go back, because I think it's going to be worth it.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.